What if I told you that one of Africa's smallest countries is spending millions of dollars every year fighting a war in another country? Not because it has oil there, not because it owns the gas fields, and not because it even shares a border with the conflict zone. On the surface, Rwanda's military mission in Mozambique looks simple. A country helping another country fight terrorism. But when you follow the money, a very different story begins to emerge. A story involving more than $50 billion in natural gas investments, some of the world's largest energy companies, and a strategy that could turn military power into one of Africa's most valuable exports. So here's the question nobody seems to be asking. Why would Rwanda spend far more money than it receives to keep thousands of soldiers deployed in Mozambique? The answer takes us deep into the forests of Cabo Delgado, to one of the biggest energy discoveries of the 21st century, and to a financial calculation worth billions. To understand why Rwanda is there today, we need to go back to March 2021, back to the moment everything almost fell apart. The town of Palma was in chaos. Gunfire echoed through the streets. Thousands of terrified civilians ran for their lives. Buildings burned, businesses shut down, and panic spread far beyond Mozambique's borders. Because Palma wasn't just another town. It sat at the center of one of the most ambitious energy projects in Africa. Just offshore, beneath the waters of northern Mozambique, lay enormous natural gas reserves. Not millions, not billions, trillions of cubic feet of natural gas. Enough to transform Mozambique's economy for generations. Enough to attract some of the biggest energy companies on Earth. TotalEnergies, ExxonMobil, Eni. Together, they plan to invest more than $50 billion. For Mozambique, this was supposed to be the beginning of a new era. New jobs, new infrastructure, new wealth. A chance to become one of the world's major exporters of liquefied natural gas. Then, the insurgency arrived. What began as a local extremist movement gradually evolved into a violent terrorist campaign. Villages were attacked, civilians were killed, entire communities disappeared. Hundreds of thousands of people fled their homes. As the violence expanded, investors became increasingly nervous. Then came the attack on Palma, the moment that changed everything. Almost overnight, TotalEnergies suspended its massive $20 billion LNG project. Foreign workers were evacuated, construction stopped. Billions of dollars were frozen. The future suddenly looked uncertain. And there was one question hanging over everyone involved. Could Mozambique guarantee security? Or was the country's biggest economic opportunity slipping away? Then something unexpected happened. A country located more than 1,500 kilometers away decided to intervene. Rwanda. At first, many observers were surprised. Why Rwanda? Why would a small, landlocked nation deploy thousands of soldiers into a conflict that wasn't directly threatening its territory? There were no oil fields owned by Rwanda, no gas concessions, no territorial disputes, no obvious economic interest, at least not at first glance. In July 2021, Rwandan troops arrived in Cabo Delgado, and almost immediately the situation began to change. Strategic towns were retaken, supply routes reopened, insurgent positions were pushed back. Areas surrounding key energy infrastructure became significantly safer. Investors noticed, governments noticed, the energy industry noticed. For the first time in years, there was hope that the LNG projects could eventually move forward. Today, more than 6,000 Rwandan soldiers and police officers are believed to be serving in Mozambique. And maintaining a force of that size overseas is incredibly expensive. Which brings us to the mystery at the center of this story. Who pays for all of this? For years, part of the answer came from Europe. Through the European Peace Facility, the European Union provided financial support for Rwanda's mission. Around 20 million euros initially. Additional funding followed. But then, President Paul Kagame revealed something surprising. According to him, that money wasn't even close to covering the real cost. In an interview, Kagame explained that Rwanda was spending roughly 4 to 5 times more than the European contribution to maintain the deployment. Later, government spokesperson Yolanda Makolo went even further. She stated that the true cost of the mission was at least 10 times greater than the amount provided by Europe. Think about that for a second. If Europe contributes 20 million euros, and Rwanda claims the actual costs are many times higher, then Kigali could be spending tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars to sustain this operation. For a country of Rwanda's size, that's a serious commitment. Which raises an obvious question. Why continue? Why absorb such enormous costs? The answer may have been hidden inside a single statement made by Kagame, a statement that received surprisingly little attention. He argued that Rwanda wasn't simply protecting Mozambique. The mission was also protecting the companies operating there. And suddenly, everything starts making sense. Because this isn't just a counterterrorism operation. It's the protection of more than $50 billion in strategic investments. Imagine that for a moment. $50 billion. Massive LNG terminals, export infrastructure, future government revenues, international supply chains, entire economic plans built around one region. Now compare that to the cost of maintaining a military deployment. Even if security costs hundreds of millions per year, it remains tiny compared to the value being protected. For investors, instability is expensive, sometimes catastrophically expensive. A single major attack can delay projects for years, increase insurance costs, force evacuations, destroy confidence, and freeze billions of dollars overnight. We've already seen that happen. The attack on Palma demonstrated exactly how quickly investments can disappear when security collapses. And that's why what Rwanda provided became so valuable. Not just military victories, confidence, predictability, stability. The ingredients every investor needs before committing billions. But the story goes even deeper. Because Rwanda may not simply be protecting investments, it may be building an entirely new economic model. Most countries export natural resources: oil, gas, gold, copper, agricultural products. Rwanda doesn't possess massive reserves of oil or gas. Instead, it has spent years developing something different: military capability, professional armed forces, rapid deployment capacity, operational experience. And increasingly, that capability appears to be generating strategic value far beyond Rwanda's borders. Think about it. If a government faces an insurgency threatening critical infrastructure, who can it call? If investors need stability around multi-billion-dollar projects, who can help provide it? Rwanda is positioning itself as an answer to those questions. Security has become a strategic asset, and Cabo Delgado has become its showcase. A real-world demonstration watched by governments, corporations, and investors across Africa and beyond. Every successful operation strengthens Rwanda's reputation. Every restored investment proves capability. Every security success becomes a form of advertising. And reputation has value, sometimes enormous value. But then politics entered the equation, and suddenly things became complicated. While Rwanda's forces were operating in Mozambique, relations between Kigali and several Western governments were becoming increasingly tense over developments in eastern Congo. Criticism grew, sanctions followed, and European governments found themselves facing an uncomfortable contradiction. How could they criticize Rwanda's actions in one conflict while continuing to finance Rwandan military operations somewhere else? Political pressure mounted. Funding became controversial. Support became uncertain. Rwandan officials openly complained that assistance was becoming politicized. They argued that countries benefiting from stability around major energy investments were becoming increasingly reluctant to continue supporting the mission. Then came a turning point. Instead of relying on Europe, Rwanda and Mozambique moved toward a more direct arrangement. According to Rwanda's foreign minister, Mozambique agreed to continue providing the financial and logistical support necessary to maintain Rwandan forces in Cabo Delgado. The exact figures remain confidential, but the message was unmistakable. The mission would continue, and Mozambique was prepared to pay for it. When you consider what is at stake, the decision becomes easier to understand. Because for Mozambique, the cost of funding security may be far lower than the cost of losing it. Without security, investments stall, projects freeze, revenue disappears, economic growth slows, confidence evaporates. With security, the LNG industry survives. Investors remain engaged. Future revenues remain possible. For Maputo, the calculation is ultimately economic. For Kigali, it may be both economic and strategic. And together, they may be creating a model that could reshape how security partnerships work across Africa. So the next time you hear that Rwanda is fighting terrorism in Mozambique, remember that there is another story unfolding behind the headlines. A story about gas, about investment, about influence, about billions of dollars waiting beneath the ocean floor, and about a country that discovered something powerful. In today's world, security isn't only a necessity. It can also be a highly valuable export. The question now is not whether Rwanda's mission has changed Cabo Delgado. The real question is this: has Rwanda quietly built one of Africa's most successful strategic businesses? And, if it has, which country might be next? If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe for more deep investigations into Africa's hidden economies, geopolitical power plays, and the billion-dollar stories happening behind the headlines.